Well, hello, bed crimers. Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T, and today I want to talk about the Idaho 4 case. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support the work I do, please consider a membership or a PayPal donation or a coffee. Heck, I'll take just about anything. And with that out of the way, let's dig in. If the Idaho 4 case that saw college students Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Madison Mogan brutally unalived just after 4 a.m. on November 13th of 2022 in what should have been their sanctuary, their rental home at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, didn't already freak you out? We now have this selfie of the defendant in the case, Bryan Kohberger. To refresh your memory, these 4 beautiful human beings were attacked between 4:04 a.m. and 4:20 a.m., a time when some may have been sleeping in their bedrooms, others awake but maybe sleepy, some perhaps intoxicated from a night out at the bars. I think it's safe to say that all of them would have been relaxed and definitely not imagining that a stranger wearing all black and a face mask was about to invade their sanctuary. Roommates Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk somehow survived, but Dylan did lay eyes on the perpetrator sometime before 4:19 a.m. when she opened her bedroom door and peeked out. She saw a figure walking past her in black clothing and a ski mask that covered his forehead and mouth. Dylan told investigators she was standing about 3 feet from this person. Oh my God. Can you imagine the fright? Now, unfortunately, Dylan, who told detectives she may still have been drunk during the early morning encounter and had just woken up after hearing unusual sounds, did not identify Kohberger as the person she saw inside the house. Interesting. I would imagine that that's a big win for Kohberger's defense team. However, Dylan has given the same description of the suspect, including saying that he has bushy eyebrows each time she's been interviewed. She told investigators at one point, quote, "I just remember like bushy eyebrows. That's all I could think about," end quote. According to the prosecution, Bryan Kohberger took this selfie from his phone on the same day of the crime at 10:30 a.m. That was approximately 6 hours after the 4 students were unalived. It was also after Kohberger allegedly drove to the crime scene at around 9 a.m. Clearly, by 10:30 a.m., Kohberger appears to be showered and rather pleased with himself in what looks to be his bathroom, maybe at his Pullman, Washington apartment. In the image, Kohberger has his hair slicked back. He's wearing a white button-down shirt, as well as audio devices in his ears. The thin-lipped smirk and the dark eyes are, to me, very chilling. As he was taking this photo, the 2 survivors at the house were wondering what happened the night before and why their roommates weren't answering their cell phones. Why do you think Kohberger gave himself the thumbs up? If you think he's guilty, then that appears to be a private celebration over committing the crime. If you think he's innocent, what can explain this thumbs up selfie? Does he think he looks particularly good? Kaylee Gonsalves' family wrote on their Facebook page that the selfie is, quote, disgusting, but that they hoped the latest court documents indicate that the truth is finally coming out. Kaylee's father, Steve Gonsalves, who has been very outspoken, told News Nation that he believes Kohberger took this selfie as a message to the Idaho authorities. Steve said, quote, "That's an F you to Idaho. I just went into your state. I just unalived your kids in their beds, and you're not going to catch me. I'm going to shower up here, clean off the last bit of evidence." End quote. The prosecution wants this selfie entered into evidence because survivor Dylan Mortensen described the intruder as having those bushy eyebrows. And Dylan is the only living person who saw the perpetrator. Prosecutors argue that Dylan's description of this suspect, including his bushy eyebrows, has the, quote, tendency to make a fact, meaning the identity of the perpetrator more probable than it would be without this evidence. The defense is saying the evidence of bushy eyebrows is not relevant, and they believe any evidence referring to bushy eyebrows should be excluded from the trial because it would be, quote, unfairly prejudicial. The defense wrote this in a filing from February 2025, quote, "If evidence of bushy eyebrows is presented to the jury might well believe that Mr. Kohberger is guilty simply because of bushy eyebrows." End quote. The defense is also questioning whether Dylan's recollection of events is accurate because she has, quote, acknowledged that her brain might have been fuzzy due to alcohol and sleepiness when she saw the intruder, end quote. The defense also pointed to inconsistencies in her statements to investigators. Per the defense, quote, several weeks after the Red Rums, DM, meaning Dylan Mortensen, thought that the person she saw was a fireman. In her mind, DM thought that the intruder went out of the backsliding door, but she doesn't know if he actually went out the back door. End quote. How does she not know if he went out the back door? I guess she didn't stand there watching. Maybe she just imagined that. Maybe she heard the sliding doors open and close, or simply close if they were left open. You gotta wonder if Kohberger is going to be treated to some facial waxing before his trial in August. If I were on his defense team, I'd definitely make sure that those puppies were tamed. And in fact, I might be tempted to over-wax the brows, as so many of us have done in our youth, or over-plucked. I was going to tell you a story about a beauty school person who was waxing a client's eyebrows and put the wax over the entire eyebrow, but that might be too much of an aside. I'm sure you can imagine what happened. Along with Kohberger's disturbing selfie, the prosecutors provided a copy of Kohberger's driver's license, which was issued in September of 2020 in his home state of Pennsylvania. The photo shows the same bushy eyebrows. And guess what? Kohberger has the words organ donor on his license. Now that's very interesting. If he is the guilty party, it makes me wonder if this is his way of trying to do something good. You allegedly unalive 4 human beings, and then you donate your organs? What to make of that? If he's guilty and gets the DP, is that a way to sort of continue living? The authorities have determined that between March 20th and March 30th of 2022, Kohberger purchased a K-bar with a leather sheath and a sharpener. That is pretty damning in my opinion, although detectives have not found the weapon. And you may recall that a leather K-bar sheath was found at the crime scene, and it had Kohberger's DNA on it. Kohberger's lawyers are asking that their client's click activity online not be counted as evidence. The prosecutors argue that because of the DNA evidence, The knowledge of this K-bar purchase before the crime is relevant. The prosecutors believe that because of the DNA found on the sheet at the crime scene, Kohberger's purchase of the K-bar before the crime went down makes it more probable that the K-bar sheath found at the crime scene belonged to Brian Kohberger. That's why they believe Kohberger's online activity is relevant. The two images, the selfie and the driver's license, are part of a set of 40 documents that were unsealed on Wednesday. Now, the judge has yet to rule on whether the selfie and the driver's license can be shared at trial, and also on whether or not the information about bushy eyebrows can be shared at trial. Now, in a court filing last week, Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson wrote that a defense expert's disclosure revealed that Kohberger's lawyers won't challenge the DNA found on the sheath belongs to Kohberger. Thompson wrote, quote, "The defense plans to argue that the DNA on the sheath does not prove defendant was ever at the crime scene, and the sheath itself could have been planted by the real perpetrator," end quote. Reasonable doubt. Now, if he's found guilty, Kohberger could face the DP. His lawyers are arguing that he should not be unalived because he is on the autism spectrum and it would violate his constitutional rights. They are also saying that he has obsessive compulsive disorder and that his reactions at trial may be misinterpreted. The defense wrote, quote, "For example, he does not show emotion on his face. He has a flat affect. He sits very still and holds his hands in the same position," end quote. They also admit that he has a piercing stare, a stiff body posture, and uses repetitive language. Interesting. I would love to see Kohberger take the stand. I doubt he will be allowed to do that, but it would be fascinating. But prosecutors say in their latest filing that Kohberger was shown to be diagnosed with the least severe form of autism that comes, quote, "without accompanying intellectual or language impairment," and that he has failed to show his diagnosis, quote, "would in any way make him less culpable for red rum," end quote. They didn't use the word red rum. Spell it backwards, and you know what I'm trying to say. Kohberger's defense also contends that Kohberger routinely went on drives at night, including when the crime in Moscow went down, and that cell phone tower data will prove he was miles away from the crime scene when it happened. Along with the selfie and the driver's license, the prosecution also wants to have text messages between the survivors, Dylan and Bethany, included as evidence at trial. Now, these texts took place between Bethany and Dylan from 4:22 a.m. to 4:24 a.m. as they failed to reach the other housemates by phone. So they heard the weird sounds, or at least Dylan did, and then they tried to reach the other housemates, but nobody answered. And we know that a 911 call was not made until the next morning around noon. I do get the feeling that these two survivors were probably inebriated. They weren't sure of what they heard or what happened, and that may be why that call was delayed for so long. But Kohberger's lawyers are claiming that the texts in the prosecution's motion were selective, and the defense in its filing presented further evidence showing that the roommates were calling and using their phones beginning at 7:30 a.m. until 911 was dialed on one of their phones at 11:56 a.m. Wow. The roommates were allegedly on Instagram, Snapchat, and other social media, although the defense's filing doesn't detail the extent of their activity or if anyone picked up when they called other people. That is just so weird. So does this mean that Dylan and Bethany really didn't see the masked intruder as someone who could have possibly harmed anyone, even though their roommates were suddenly silent and not answering their phones? I want to believe that they had no clue about their roommates' deaths if they were going on Instagram and other social media, and because they didn't call until just before noon. The defense is now asking the judge to review the fuller picture of the roommates' conversation to determine whether the text should be excluded from trial because the messages are hearsay. The defense's filing said that the surviving roommates, quote, texted each other a handful of times, and then they were in the same bedroom. They were together with the ability to talk to each other. They were not asleep for 8 hours, end quote. Steve Gonsalves told NBC News earlier this week that while the family was at first surprised that the 911 call had not been made sooner, he doesn't blame the surviving roommates for how they acted. He said, quote, when you start looking at all the facts and you start seeing everything, you realize that the girls just went to bed that night thinking something was weird, something was strange, but they didn't have a full extent of everything that was going on. It's hard to have positive things when you have 4 people that are unalived, but it could have been a lot worse, end quote. I'm going to now read you the text messages between Dylan to Bethany and vice versa, as well as between Dylan to Kaylee. I guess it wasn't between, it was to Kaylee. She didn't respond between 4:22 a.m. and 4:24 a.m. I'm going to read you the text messages between Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, and there are some messages that went unanswered to Kaylee Gonsalves. And again, these took place between 4:22 a.m. and 4:24 a.m. That would have been right around the time the masked man was walking out of the house. DM to BF. By the way, DM is Dylan Mortensen and BF obviously is Bethany Funk. Dylan writes, no one is answering. I'm really confused. Dylan writes to Kaylee, Kaylee, what's going on? Then she writes, then Bethany writes to Dylan, yeah, dude, what the F? WTF? Bethany writes to Dylan, Xana was wearing all black. Dylan writes, I'm freaking out. Again, Dylan writes, no, it's like ski mask almost. Bethany writes, STFU, shut the F up. Then she writes, actually, don't know why she wrote actually, DM to BF, like he had something over his head and little mouth. DM to BF, I'm not kidding. Oh, am so freaked out. I think she meant, I am so freaked out. BF to DM, so am I. DM to BF, my phone is going to die. F. I think you know the word. It's the 4-letter word that starts with F and ends with K. BF to DM, come to my room. Run down here. And it is believed that Dylan did run down to the bedroom, to Bethany's bedroom on the lowest floor of the home, and that's where she spent the night. The next morning, DM sends the following text messages starting at 10:23 a.m. She sends them to Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan. DM to Gonsalves, please answer. DM to Mogan, are you up? DM to Gonsalves, are you up? I think it's pretty obvious that Dylan had no idea that her friends had been unalived. I think she would have dialed 911 if she thought that the masked man was capable of what he did. I really believe it never even entered her mind that something like that could have happened. These are young college girls. They're not going to automatically jump to the conclusion that a red rummer was inside the home with a sharp object doing that to their friends. So I think the text messages actually help to explain why they didn't dial 911 until just before noon. That's all for today, and I'll see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Please subscribe to the channel.